Okay, so what is interdependence? We're all connected in our thoughts, in our feelings. Every single thought and emotion I have literally influences everyone in the world. And likewise, every single person and their thoughts, their behaviors, their feelings have this influence on every single person. And if we think about it in that way, then that's truly the essence of our interdependence, and it has enormous implications, this interdependence. Our history can be viewed from the perspective of us becoming more and more connected, more and more interdependent throughout the whole of our history. And such development can also raise the question of what's our next step in interdependence. If you see all these steps taking place here, one major aspect of that is that it's all external, you could say superficial connections that are enhancing and becoming more complex all the time. And we should ask ourselves here that when we have such a major connectedness to each other today and a major interdependence today that we can see and feel in all kinds of ways, what's the next step of our interdependence? Evolutionary biologists in the 80s and 90s got very excited about this discovery they made. 2 billion years ago, ancient bacteria went through an evolutionary process which holds a lot of relevance for us humans living today, specifically today in our era. It's a 5-step process, what they found. That we're talking about 2 billion years ago, by the way. There's no humans back then, no animals, no plant life. We're talking about the planet with bacteria on it. So the first thing was that they found that the bacteria first operated among each other with this competitive individualism. What does it mean? A process of spreading and multiplying with a focus on fulfilling self-interests. That as long as there was enough resources in the planet to go around, and then this was fine. That they were just taking from the available resources, each one as if just fulfilling its own self-interest. And the more they developed into a crisis of competitive individualism. A crisis emerges when the multiplication of the self-interested parts, each one of these bacteria, reaches a threshold, meaning that the resources became scarce and the parts surviving off those resources become more competitive. So you had situations where some grew immensely and others pretty much died off. Some took a lot of the resources that were available from the planet, and others simply couldn't get enough to survive. Literally, they encountered crisis through this evolution of self-interest and focusing narrowly only on self-interest. And then eventually some kind of shift happened at that point, some kind of shift in nature. Some kind of awareness, you could say, among those bacteria of crisis of that competitive individualism while being dependent on one another, meaning that some kind of event happened that made them realize that they couldn't keep going with that same narrow mode of just fulfilling self-interests. Then a shift took place. So a new approach emerges to the interdependent situation. They started cooperating for the sake of their mutual survival. And through that, a new entity emerged, expressed by the cooperation of all parts, where each part receives what's necessary for its sustenance and gives any surplus for the benefit of the whole. What's that new entity? They call it the nucleated cell, meaning something new, meaning that by these bacteria shifting from only wanting to each one receive for itself to shifting to a mode where you could say it's similar to the way our cells and organs function in our body and various other systems in nature, where each bacteria receives what it needs for its sustenance, for its necessities to survive, and gives all the surplus for the benefit of all the bacteria or every other part of the system. So they formed this new united entity, nucleated cell. And it became one stage that was necessary in order to keep going and developing more life. Why is this example so significant? Why do evolutionary biologists get really excited about this? Because it shows that even before there's humans, before there's animals, before there's any kind of beings that might have some choice in the matter, nature's showing a course of development that takes individual parts through a process of competitive individualism to a point of crisis, and then from that crisis undergoing a certain shift to a more unified state. And if we take that example that the biologists point to in ancient bacteria 2 billion years ago, and we apply it to our human society today, so we can also try to think in terms of our situation, that we can understand how we've been operating according to competitive self-interests until today. We can also understand that it's leading us to some form of crisis on a global scale, and we see examples of that in several areas. And so then we can start really bringing to the dialogue and to the discussion table, what does it mean to undergo a shift to a new united entity as human beings? And we're not here just naively and in a utopian way saying that, let's all just love each other like a family. But there's certain exercises that we need to do. We need to understand that it's kind of like a muscle that we're building and training in society and in each person's individual attitudes, and according to certain wisdom that we can learn through this. And by exercising that muscle at certain stages, we can get moments of an experience of connection, some kind of feeling that, like that example of the bacteria, that by connecting, we form some kind of new entity. And that new entity also feels a new kind of pleasure, a new kind of harmony, a new kind of peace that's coming to it, you could say, from a different source and a different place in nature that we've never felt before, because we've never connected over the current divisive drives we feel in humanity today. But if we do so, even just in a small group, then we can experience a new kind of level of connection. And once there is such an experience of that connection, it would also start encouraging people more and more to share that experience and spread it. And that really becomes the mold for achieving happiness and success on a large scale.